Here in the museum section of the Gott Library, one of the areas that we're very proud of and that we invite our visitors to peruse is the area that is called our Hall of Honor. The men and women featured on the wall here are basically those men and women who served, as Tom Brokaw said, our greatest generation. And many of these men and women served during that period of time. It's not all inclusive. There are many, this is a work in progress, there are many individuals that we are still seeking photos from that will be added to the wall that is in existence here. A couple of individuals that we might consider for just a brief period of time. One is Colonel Homer Wells. In 1944, he was a pilot, pilot of a B-17, and he was flying his aircraft over the Bay of Biscay, and he was shot down by the Nazi forces at that time, and as Colonel Wells would say, for a period of time he was held as a house guest of the Third Reich. During that period of time, he created a diary, and we have that diary in place here as well. Another individual that you will see when you visit with us is Private Calvin Downs. He was a young man who entered the Army, and he was with the invasion forces that went in to invade France. And he was wounded during that invasion exercise. He was sent back to England to recuperate. And unfortunately, when his time for recuperation was complete, he was told he would be sent back with his unit to France. Well, as is said sometimes, the second shell had his name on it. When he returned to his unit, he was fatally wounded in September of 1944. We have a letter of declaration from President Roosevelt. We have the Purple Hearts that were awarded to Private Downs. Both Colonel Wells, Private Downs, and a multitude of other materials are on display here at the Gott Library. These and hundreds, literally hundreds of other items are on display here in the museum section, and they are cared for by our museum curator, Rachel Scott.
As curator here at the Gott, I have the opportunity to care for hundreds of wonderful artifacts that are housed here and on display at the library. One such object is a general store ledger that comes to us from Hopewell. It dates back to 1912. And these items and items like this are important because they show us not only commerce of the time, but a lifestyle around agriculture, around livestock, and a small town, hometown feel here in Marshall. Another item we have here at the Gott is a Bible. Now, what makes these so interesting to us here is that they were used to house the genealogy. And a lot like, I'm sure a lot of our moms did, I know my mom did, this particular owner also tucked away clippings and certificates that tell a more complete tale of the history of her children, her grandchildren, and their heritage. Here in this case, we have items that tell the history of the town of Marshall that include architectural items, items from the high school and small town education, commerce, and agriculture. A few interesting items include two objects that were found recently in 2014 in the demolition of the Fry House. The Fry House is an 1853 home that stood here in town, and when they tore it down just 2 years ago, they found a part of a pipe and, interestingly enough, a cannonball that was in an outer wall of that home. And here we have the famous Mosby Saddle. This is actually a misnomer because this saddle was used by John Ballard, and he is famous for being the man who lost his right leg not once but twice in the Civil War. It was in June of 1863 at Ewell's Chapel where the 43rd Virginia Cavalry was surprised by Union forces. And unfortunately, young Mr. Ballard took a bullet to his right leg, which you can see went all the way through his leg and pierced the saddle itself. Now, we think that it probably was not the initial injury, but having to ride his horse all the way back to a safe place that caused him to lose the integrity of his leg, and it did have to be amputated. He was discharged in October of that year, but he didn't stay retired for very long. It seems that it did not suit him to stay out of the war, and by winter, he was riding under Mosby once again. And it was then that in a battle, he lost his leg again. His fake leg was crushed, and he was able to take one off of a fallen Union soldier. It worked for him, so he wore it. And he wore it up until the photo that we have of him over here on the wall at the 50th reunion of the 43rd Virginia Cavalry, where you can see him on his crutch and that same leg he took off of that fallen Union soldier. Here we have historical objects of Dr. Jackson Anderson, who was a physician here in Fauquier County, and items that came from the Marshall Pharmacy. We have such interesting items as his ledger showing what it might have cost to go to a doctor in 1912, for instance. We also have his notes, and we have some interesting pharmaceutical artifacts from the early half of the 1900s here in Marshall.
In 1870, immediately after the American Civil War, public school education became a mainstay in the Commonwealth of Virginia. The building that we are standing in, or the wing of the building that we are standing in, was adopted into the public school system. So the old bell that we have on display at the Gott Library hung in the belfry immediately above my head. And it was in there that it would stay for about from 1870 up until 1910. In 1910, the old bell began its unusual history of its own. The bell at that particular point in time was in, as I've said, the public school building. 1910, the public school was moved to a site about a block or two from where we're presently standing. And that bell remained there as a part of the Marshall High School complex until 1963, when high school education in this part of Fauquier ceased to exist. All students at that point in time would be shipped to the consolidated school in Warrenton. But the old bell still had its purpose. It would ring students to class, it would ring school into session, that sort of thing. And it remained at the old school, which was now a junior high school and an elementary school. It remained there until the fateful morning of December 1969. And there was a tremendous fire that ignited in the old school site. And what was left was basically nothing at all, with the exception of the old bell. The fire department then removed the existing bell from the ashes, and they put it into safekeeping, where it remained for about 20 years or so. When we came into existence, the Fauquier Heritage and Preservation Foundation came into existence. the fire chief had a gift to present to us. He presented us with the old bell, and it's our goal to return that bell to its former status above my head, where it will hang for years and years to come.